We got a malicious compliance story involving 40 goats? We'll get into that in a bit, but first, Condiments The Great. Hi all, Happy New Year's. In reviewing some of my best memories of the last few years, I remembered an incident of malicious compliance that I found overwhelmingly satisfying and thought it would be worth sharing. While not as outrageous as some of the stories here, it left me feeling like I stuck it to our corporate overlords a bit. To set the stage, I moved back to the US to take a job at a pretty big firm where I was also tasked with executive assistant responsibilities. My boss would regularly send me downstairs to our local bank to pick up and deposit cash. Having newly moved back to the US, I needed to set up a bank account for direct deposits and figure the one downstairs makes sense. Also, it made depositing paychecks quicker and easier. On the day I went to open the account, the manager of the branch sat me down to go through all the paperwork. She was nice enough at first, and I got through everything quite quickly. That said, when it came to the signature portion, I thought I would have a bit of fun of it and create a silly signature. Having just watched a Roman documentary the night before, I made my signature Condiments The Great. Obviously, I used my first name in place of condiments. The manager did not bat an eye at this, assuming she didn't read it, and said she would process everything and give me a call when my card is ready to collect. Cut to a little later, I receive a call from the manager saying there's something wrong with the paperwork and I needed to come down to correct it. When I ask what the problem is, she says that I'm not allowed to have a signature like that, and I need to redo it using my actual name. I say okay and that I'll be right down. This kinda ticked me off though, because I've seen wild signatures that hardly resemble letters, yet they were still accepted. I did some quick research and found that legally, a signature can be any mark that I plan on using consistently. It didn't have to be a name, nor even resemble letters. Being bored that day, I decided to press it and print out the laws regarding signatures and bring them with me to the bank. When I met the manager, I told her that I'd actually like to keep the signature as is and provided her with the documents I printed outlining the laws. She did not seem enthused at all and said she would need a moment to discuss with her superiors. A few minutes later, she comes back and says, "While I'm correct about the law, they require the signature to match the one on my driver's license, since that's the one currently associated with me." I pushed back and mentioned that I wanted to have a new signature, but she was firm on it matching my ID or they wouldn't open my account. Cue malicious compliance. I realized then that since the state I moved to was different from the one I lived in before, I had to legally update my license, so I told the manager I would think it over and get back to her soon. I hurried upstairs and made a DMV appointment for later that week to get a new license. The day of the DMV appointment, I brought everything I needed to ensure I walked out with a new license. When it was time for me to provide a signature for the license, I again wrote Condiments The Great and was again met with pushback. The teller literally said, "Sir, this is the DMV and we don't play games like that." Well, I whipped out the law to show them that I'm actually allowed to use this as my signature, and the teller's ego deflated real fast. Long story short, I walked out that day with a shiny new license and my new signature. I drove directly from the DMV back to the bank and met with a teller. I told her that I'll agree to sign the documents using the same signature on my license. I don't think she could have looked any more smug. She took me to the back office and sat me down to re-sign the documents, and I did so as Condiments The Great. When she saw this, she practically started shouting about how I'm wasting their time and either need to get serious or they'll have me escorted out. This is when I slowly removed my brand new ID and slid it across the desk. Her face went blank, and I honestly couldn't tell what she was thinking. She asked me to leave the office for a moment so she could make a call. 10 minutes later, she comes out and says, "While my signature does match the one on my license, they are just refusing to do business with me and asked me to leave." Not knowing the legality of that, I said okay and accepted defeat. I walked back up to my office and told my boss that they're not allowing me to open an account. I told him the full story, and he actually found it hilarious. He then said that he would handle it. Later that day, I received a call from the bank saying that they changed their mind and that they've opened the checking and savings accounts I requested. I went to speak with my boss after, who said that he had a productive chat with the manager. Knowing how much business he provides the bank, he was happy enough to bluff on my behalf. He essentially told the manager that not allowing me to open an account was directly affecting his business, and that if they don't oblige, he would close his accounts and take his business elsewhere. Apparently that threat hit hard, and the manager quickly backtracked, saying that they never refused my business, just had to get approval from upper management. At the end of the day, I was victorious and still used the signature on all official documents. It's a bit silly, but it's my trophy and a good conversation starter. This is the one thing that I truly love about signatures, is it doesn't have to be your name in cursive. It could, in theory, literally be like a little doodle that you can quickly recreate. You usually more so hear about this kind of thing when it comes to like doctor's signatures, or when you're checking out at the supermarket and they ask you to sign a receipt and you might just scribble something. Like, I've heard people who like try to test it and just write down in literal plain English Mickey Mouse. Not even in cursive, just plain English Mickey Mouse to see if the teller will react, and they usually don't. I kind of love though the idea that you're adopting that as your official signature. TechNot commented, after I moved states and needed a new phone installed, yes, long time ago, they asked if I wanted the number published as there was a fee involved in having an unpublished number. I asked if I could have the name published however I wanted, and they said certainly, so I had it published as The Great and Powerful Oz. Caller ID was brand new then, and when I called someone, it would show up as Oz the GR or something like that, and in the phone book, again long time ago, it showed up as Oz the Great and Powerful. I got many confused people answering calls, but best of all, when someone was cold calling me, they would ask for Oz the, and I knew how to treat them. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is me rampant hairballs. When I was a teen and cleaned my hairbrush, my hairballs would land somewhere random when they fell out of my pocket, I guess, or just because they were wild teen hairballs and ran off. My sister was cleaning up and I guess she found one, but I hadn't seen it. She left a note on my door saying, "Hello, please contain your hairballs, okay, smiley face." So I put a massive hairball in a sandwich bag and taped it to her door saying, "I contained it, smiley face. Love, OP." She jokingly screamed, but laughed about it. Can most of us agree that once hair is detached from the body and you shed it and it's gone, it immediately becomes like a mental biohazard? All I'm gonna say is when I'm out in the world, I don't want some random hair falling on me coming into contact with me, especially if you have no idea where it came from. In this kind of vein, it makes me think of recently I had a pizza delivered and I was eating with the box open. I look down at the next slice I grab and there's a hair on it. I cannot understate the mental gymnastics that begin of trying to rationalize how this is one of my homegrown hairs and not the person who made the pizza accidentally leaving an extra ingredient. I agree with the sister, OP needs to keep the hairballs contained, and honestly, I don't think it's too hard to keep hairballs contained. Is it not just a matter of cleaning your brush regularly? Hitsprint commented, "Am I the only person who doesn't completely understand what a hairball is? I know it's something cats cough up, but I never heard this in a human context. Why does OP's hair turn into balls? My wife doesn't understand either." Our next story is, it's just water. I used to work for a crappy pest control company. They had a customer that everyone hated. She ran off the text before me. Not even the managers wanted to deal with her. I pulled into her driveway, and before I could even put the truck in park, I heard her yelling racial slurs at our lawn workers. She glanced my way as she turned around and stormed inside, slamming her front door behind her. I went to the front door and knocked, but she wouldn't answer. I radioed our office and told them she wouldn't answer the door. The secretary told me that the lady knew I was coming, just go in and start working. Reluctantly, I checked the front door. It's locked. I knock again, still no answer. I go to my truck and radio my office again. This time, a manager is going to call her. They tell me to go back to the door and wait. I do, still no answer. I go back to the truck. They didn't call because she knows you're there. We thought she would come to the door, says the secretary. This kept happening until I refused to leave the truck. Eventually, the lady opened her front door and stood there, arms folded, mean-eyed, looking right at me through my windshield as if she could see my fear and anxiety somehow. I politely introduced myself, and she didn't speak. After standing there unsure if to enter or not, she walked back into the house with the door wide open. Okay, I guess I spray? It was eerily quiet. I eventually worked my way to the master bedroom to see her and a caretaker holding up her husband who was very ill. I want to tell you the dialogue, but it was ridiculous and repetitive. I'll fast forward by saying she was very rude, and I don't know why she had our service. She clearly didn't want me in the house, but also wanted me in the house. Yes, you heard that correctly. I told the bosses that I didn't want to go back, but they sent me again, and the same thing as last time happened. I got tired of it and decided that from now on, she gets no pesticide inside. So for the next several years, I only sprayed water inside and outside. And on top of that, I acted like it was a joy to do her service and that there were no further problems. She would call and complain and ask for the manager to come out. He would lie and tell her he was coming, but send me instead. Am I the only person that thought when OP got to the point of, we got to the bedroom and the husband was there looking very ill, that there was going to be like this second half turn where all of a sudden all of her behavior makes perfect sense and there's like somehow quiet and understanding and respectful, yet still malicious compliance? No, actually that's just how this lady is. Our next story is my new favorite customer. I own and run a residential/light commercial HVAC contracting company. We have a customer, we'll call him Tom, that contacted us for a residential breakdown. Tom told us that he had a home warranty, and we informed him that their repayment policy is often different than our billing rates and that, regardless of their payment, he would be individually responsible for the full amount of the bill. The repair was a smallish fix for just $228. Bear in mind that home warranty companies are notoriously stingy with payments, if they pay at all. We won't work directly with them for this reason. Sure enough, the home warranty company paid only $153 of the invoice, leaving a balance due of $75. Tom wasn't happy about having to pay this bill, so he began paying us $1 per week automatically by check through his online banking platform. Neither I or my bookkeeper were exactly excited by this because it takes the same amount of her time to process a $1 check as it does a $1,000 check, but we decided to take our lumps. Here we are now, exactly 76 weeks later, and Mr. Tom has accidentally paid us $1 too much, so we put a stop payment on the final $1 check. I actually made it a point to look up the stop check payment policy from his bank and saw that we would have to pay $35 to do this. I honestly have nothing but respect for this amount of spite. I mean, there is like a level of respect you would have for that kind of spite, but can most people agree that it's misplaced spite? If anything, this guy should have spite for himself for believing that the home warranty company is even going to try to cover any, if not all of it. Home insurance? Maybe. Now, home warranty? I'm convinced that those exist solely to try to take more money out of your pocket while fully intending never to pay a dime your way. RE42 commented, "My mom did something similar to a credit card company. She thought she paid the balance in full, but turns out she still owed 2 cents. She called the company thinking they'll be reasonable, but nope. They make her send them a check for her remaining balance. So she sent them a check for 10 cents, and they sent her a check for 8 cents. She would get the check and then shred it. They sent her so many checks for 8 cents over the years, it's hilarious how much money they've wasted over that original 2 cents. Previous Wedding 577 commented, "When I quit working at McDonald's in the 90s, 2 months later, the store called to tell me there was a paycheck for me. It was for 2 freaking cents. I never cashed that check, so it would cost them in fees for bookkeeping to stale date it." Our next story is, "Just send me the invoice," so I sent it 14 times. A client kept forgetting to pay, so they would ask me to resend the invoice every week. After the 5th time, I sent a reminder to email it daily until they paid. They finally called yelling, "Why are you spamming me?" I said, "Just following your instructions." Update, so a lot of you were asking what happened next. After I sent the invoice 14 times, the client finally called me, voice absolutely dripping with indignation, and said, "Why are you spamming me?" I calmly replied, "Oh, I thought you needed it resent. Just making sure you've got it this time." There was a pause, the kind of pause where you can hear someone's soul leave their body for a second. They then mumbled something about getting the check sorted and hung up. The best part? They paid that same day. All 14 invoices were marked as read in my email tracker within an hour. Moral of the story, sometimes the squeaky wheel doesn't just get the grease, it gets paid. I think when it comes to invoices and not getting paid on time, persistence and annoyance is always going to be key. First of all, you're obviously owed and entitled to that money, but second of all, if you just pop up and you send them a very polite reminder, all things considered, just reminding them to pay the invoice, like what's the worst thing they can probably do? Just continue to ignore it? Refuse to pay it? At least at that point, you know it's time to escalate. Hegbork commented, "The best way to get forgotten invoices paid I've ever seen was a very early web hosting company in the 90s. If the customer didn't pay on time, their website would get redirected to an error page saying, 'Site unavailable because company name doesn't pay bills on time.'" Glitterpuke commented, "Place I used to work handled the hosting for a nearby university's law school. Absolute crap client, and I was the AR person tasked with chasing down their late invoices. We eventually had to, after 3 warnings in a 1-week span, that we would take down the law school's website during enrollment. They cut the 4 months past due $250 check for hosting that afternoon. Like, how freaking hard is it to just pay your goddamn bills?" Client was the owner's alma mater, so we let them get away with too much crap. Our next story is, "She did exactly as I asked." My daughter has a big habit of making messes everywhere she goes. Absolutely zero in the executive function department. It's a pain, but I love her all the same. One day she was in my room with me and had completely destroyed my bed. Comforter on the floor, sheets coming off the corners. I said, "I'm going to need you to please make the bed neat before I come back upstairs." I went downstairs and did whatever I needed to do and then headed back up to my room. When I get there, I see my bed still looks the way it did when I left, except for one thing. There was a sign on the bed that read, "Hello, I'm neat." She made the bed into a creature called Neat. I had to laugh. In the end, we fixed the bed together. That's a cute story, and honestly, in the end, I think OP helping them and having that moment where they bond, they have a laugh about it, and then they actually correct it, that's going to be a bigger learning tool than if OP just scolded them and said, "Alright, enough of this joke nonsense, make this bed up right now." I mean, just think about it, which of those two is genuinely going to build somebody's character and responsibility up more? Gothic LG commented, "I did this once working at a grocery store and only got a laugh from the mom. She asked her son to grab something. I told him to write something on a piece of paper and grab it." Our next story is how to avoid cleaning a hot attic. My grandpa told the story from when he was young and in military, mandatory for men in Finland. The group he was in had been recently reprimanded on how they shouldn't do anything they were not ordered to do. Soon after, they were tasked to clear out an attic. It was a hot summer day, so it was like a badly warmed sauna up there. My grandpa was ordered to go take the trash to the dumpsters, so we went and did exactly that to the letter. Instead of coming back, he sat down near the dumpsters. A couple of hours later, the person in command came looking for him and asked why he was there and didn't come back to clean the attic. Grandpa's answer was simple. "I was ordered to take the trash to the dumpster. No one told me to come back." He received no punishment and is still smug about it after almost 70 years. I would just love it if that story ended with a question like, "So when you finally did get up in that attic, how was it?" And the reply would be something like, "I don't know. In the end, I never had to go up there." From Anderson commented, "This isn't quite as good as your grandpa's story, but when I was the new kid on an electrical crew, the experienced hands were always trying to send me to get things that didn't exist. Left-handed screwdrivers, metric pliers, cable stretcher, etc. I already knew most of it was just them pulling a prank, but they had nicknames for things that I hadn't heard before, so they got me a couple of times. One day, we were pulling in some very heavy cable. It was the main power cables that fed a large school building. More accurately, a winch was pulling. We were unspooling the cable, holding it over our heads, and slowly walking to where the underground pipe was. It was super hot that day, and we were all miserable. Just as I'd let go of the cable and was walking back to the end of the line again, one guy who was always giving me a hard time told me to go grab him some nonsense thing. I knew it didn't exist, and I was about to say as much when I realized 2 things. 1, I was just about to pass the door into the building. 2, This was the perfect opportunity to play dumb and go take a break. I darted through that door and was gone before anyone thought to stop me. I headed straight for the opposite end of the building where I knew nothing was going on that day and had myself a very nice little break before I came back. Usually those guys would laugh at getting one over on the new kid. They didn't think it was quite so funny that day. I may not have been an experienced hand, but I was young and strong. These guys were all in their 40s and 50s. My absence was felt, literally. Apparently, he got told off for sending me away in the middle of the job. That was in the early 90s, and I'm still just a bit smug about that one. Our next story is, you want all the shirts stacked on the edge of the table? Sure thing, boss. So I work at a clothing store on the sales floor. My job is basically to interact with customers to help them get what they're looking for and also fold, organize, and store clothes. Now during my shift, there was this table that was just packed with clothes with piles that went super tall. So I decided to start with that table. And as I was working, I noticed that there was a shelf under the table that was empty, and those shelves are normally used as storage for excess. And so my plan was to make normal piles and then store the excess in those shelves. Cause some of the rules of how things should look just say that you need like 2 or 3 items of each size per pile, and to sort them from biggest size at the bottom to smallest at the top. And there's also like an unwritten one where if the pile ends up small, to then add more until it reaches the bottom of the price sign. So I do that. I make piles that reach the bottom of the sign and then store the rest. Now, as I was starting to store the excess, one of the managers passes by and asks what I was doing. And so I explain what I already said here, and he doesn't like it and he tells me to put everything on the table. So I explain to him why that's a bad idea, because it can make it harder for customers to get their size and easier for them to make a mess accidentally. But he doesn't care and just tells me to put everything back. So I do and just stack them, and the piles end up being very tall. I'm 6'2" and some of the piles reached my chest, but that's what the boss wanted, so I finished and went away to do something else. Now, for context, our store also has like a baby or toddler area, so obviously parents sometimes bring their kids to buy clothes for them. Now, after I'd left that table to work on something else, a father stood next to the table to wait for his wife, and he had a kid on his shoulder. I don't remember why, maybe it was to burp it or calmed it down, I don't know. But now, as the father was swinging from side to side to calm the baby, he accidentally hit the side of the table, and some of the piles that were on that side fell down behind the father. And as if it was a sign of the universe to show I had the right idea, just as the father was turning around to see that happened, the baby puked, and because of the momentum, covered a lot of the shirts that were now on the floor. And so, we had no choice but to throw away those dirty clothes now, and there were a lot. Plus it got expensive because each shirt cost like $10 and there was easily like 10 to 15, maybe 20 shirts on the floor, so we lost a couple $100 there. And the worst part is that the first manager that told me to just stack them tried to pass the blame onto me. But I explained what happened to another manager, and they put the blame back on that first manager and made him pay for the damages. Edit, okay, I messed up here. They didn't make him pay. That was just something I misinterpreted from what I heard happened to him, because he did get called in by his superiors, because apparently a lot of coworkers have similar situations with that manager in the past and have been complaining about him. Yeah, I was gonna say, I'd be surprised if they can actually garnish your wages like that. I don't think, at least in America, in too many places, that's a legal thing you can do. Maybe if somebody has like some sense of responsibility and offers to, like Well Fooled commented, sure, the manager messed up, but the business taking the damages out of the manager's pay is illegal in a lot of places, and even when not illegal, is not cool. Everybody makes mistakes. The company needs to budget for those kinds of losses, not pull it out of someone's paycheck. Greased Up Tiger commented, I could see it coming out of some optional bonus the manager might get, especially if how to stack items is part of their training and rules, not just for the damaged items, but mostly for trying to throw an underling under the bus afterwards. For that, he could get in bigger trouble than losing some bonus as a learning experience. Our next story is Comptroller scared of wage theft. I work in an operations center that is manned 24/7, 365. Hurricanes, ice storms, chemical releases were staffed. Out of nowhere, the Comptroller is afraid that we're skimming hours since we don't clock in. We just put 12 hours on our time card. Now we have to clock in on the phone app and then use two-part authentication to log on to the computer. We have to hit the ground running, so to speak. Everyone shows up 15 minutes early to understand the situation and be ready to go. After we're relieved, we hang around to ensure that everything is understood and running smoothly. Since my schedule is 4/4, I get an extra hour of overtime that I was doing for free. Honestly, I think now that this is established, if they try to walk it back and say, oh, you don't have to clock in anymore, OP still needs to be clear and demand that extra OT pay for that extra hour they're spending there because they are spending it there. They deserve that money. JC Butt Buddy commented, wage theft goes both ways. If they ever try to move away from the time card and back to just paying you 12 hours, remind them that it's illegal not to pay you for hours worked. In fact, they really need to pay you for all those past hours before someone reports them. Our next story is, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. I used to be a retail manager for a convenience store, and as such, I, not a morning person, would have to be at work at 5 a.m. Knowing how I felt myself about having to be awake at that hour, I would do my best to be cheerful and make my customers smile by lightly joking a bit and telling them to have a wonderful day as we finished our transactions. One morning, one of our regulars came in, and I greeted her brightly as she approached the counter. She snarled at me that she hated my cheerful demeanor and that I always told her to have a wonderful day, and then demanded that I never so much as smile at her again. I apologized for my cheerfulness and told her that I would immediately and permanently comply with her wishes. I proceeded to do exactly that. From that day forward, I would treat my other customers in my normal cheerful way, but as she would approach the counter, I would stop smiling and bantering and drop into my natural resting bench face. I would complete our transaction and then cheerfully turn to the next person in line and continue my banter. After about a month of this, the woman came back in at her normal time and complained about how much she hated that I wouldn't banter with her like I did the other customers, and how miserable it left her feeling all day. I reminded her of her previous demands and that she was getting exactly what she demanded. I also reminded her that I'd said my lack of banter with her would be permanent. She continued to come in every morning at her usual time, and I continued to banter with the other customers, but would stop even smiling as she approached the counter, then turn to the next person in line and continue the banter. She continued to look miserable. Had she simply asked me to tone it down a bit, or said she just wasn't in the mood for banter that day, I would have adjusted accordingly. Instead, she got exactly what she asked for. I would just say OP should make sure that their manager never catches wind of any of this happening. I mean, imagine a manager hearing about this and hearing about a customer that continues to consistently give them business at a time of day and actually saying their day is getting ruined by the behavior they're getting treated with at your store. Don't get me wrong, I think OP is completely valid. I just think the manager would want to shut that down and go right back to welcome to Costco, I love you. Recordus commented, sometimes this can even create a bond with a customer. When I was working in customer service, we had a regular customer, and one time he mentioned that we're overly too cheerful. It felt artificially. I am one of the cheeky ones, and I fell to my normal voice and told him why we do that. Cheerfulness leads to less aggressiveness, yada yada. You know what? I like you more with your normal voice. From that moment on, I was his favorite agent, and he was my favorite customer. That job sucked hard, but those calls were delightful. Our next story is 40 Goats, a fun malicious compliance story. So a few years ago, after marrying my husband, my dad made a joke in poor taste that he never got his 40 goats as a dowry for allowing my husband to marry me. We're American and Christian, so dowries are not a thing for my family. Anyway, cue malicious compliance. My husband and I like to play a good prank whenever we can for a good laugh, and we did. Remember, my dad specifically said he wanted 40 goats. He didn't specify what type of goats or if they had to be alive. As such, my husband and I went onto Amazon and ordered 40 tiny toy goats to take with us to my parents' house that fateful Christmas in 2019. And one night when my parents went to bed, we strategically began placing goats all over the house. On the kitchen table, on top of the thresholds over door frames, on the bar in their basement, on the mantle, on an end table, on top of bookcases, etc. You name a place, and there were goats. To this day, there are still goats around the house, and my stepmom pointed out how one fell and hit her in the head this week. I just gotta say, the one nice consolation about this revenge is at least you know how many goats there should be if you go on a scavenger hunt to try to track them all down. But if it were up to me, I'd probably leave like 50 goats just so they can't get to 40 and have some kind of peace of mind of, oh, we must have found it all. You get to 40, you turn around, you look on top of the bookcase, and there's another goat still staring at you. The filthy DIL commented, I got 3 cows and a goat for my daughter. When I told my future son-in-law we needed to discuss bride price, my daughter almost died laughing. I'd asked for 6 cows. He countered with 3 cows and a goat. What sent daughter right over the edge was when I said, that depends on the lineage of the goat. At the wedding, they paid that bride price, 3 small stuffed cows and a goat donated in our name through Project Heifer. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.